If you play the king's Indian defense as black, here are 7 great traps to teach you what you should and should not do. Playing this defense, like this video if this is helpful, and let's begin. Trap number 1 is d4. Knight f6, c4, g6. Knight c3, bishop, g7, e4, d6. And now, if they play the move, knight f3, you can castle, of course. And if they play the move, bishop to d3, you can play bishop to g4. They can kick away your bishop, because typically this is the bad bishop for you in many openings for black. So for the next trap after bishop g7, e4, d6, they can also play the move f3. And here you can continue by castling, bishop e3. Now you can strike with e5, and after queen d2, you can play c6. They castle. And now really whatever you do, for example, a 6 or rook to e8 or bishop to e6, you have to watch out for this tactical idea of pawn takes. Now we're moving on to trap number 3, and trap number 3 is after knight to c3 bishop to g7 e4, the move d6, of course. And now instead of playing knight f3, what if they play the move f4, going for a very aggressive setup here? You continue with castles. Knight f3, you can play this move knight a6. The idea being after, for example, bishop e2 and e5 takes, and they go ultimately d5. Your knight ends up in a great square on c5. Notice one quick thing. They can't really take over here because you can trade the queens and then go knight d7, and you have a lot of pressure on this pawn, so their pawns become broken up. So this is typically not good for white, which is why here they're going to push in. Which case you consider knight. You can continue with knight to c5. They go queen to c2, defending the pawn. But you can still take knight. Takes e4 because after knight takes bishop f5 is crushing, pinning the knight. Of course, a move like knight to d. Beautiful trap here for black. Going backwards after nf3 here and castles. They can also play the immediate h3 trying to stop your bishop. And if black is not careful and plays, for example, b6 looking to fianchetto the bishop this way, because this diagonal is not as fruitful, and this continues with bishop d3. And now black plays c5 to grab some space in the center, and now e5 takes well, suddenly after you move the knight. Really, it doesn't matter where. So, for example, knight f to d7, suddenly bishop to e4, and it doesn't matter if you move the knight to e. Let's say you can play the move knight c5. And the idea with this move is that if they were to just simply castle, you can actually take knight takes e4. Ignoring the pin because you have a very equal attack here on this queen, and that is the downside of putting the queen on d2. The end result, you're up a pawn. But even better than the material is just this crushing position you have built, where you have such a solid structure in the center, and you have very nice open lines for your pieces. And this works again for a slightly different reason, because after knight takes, and pawn takes, bishop takes d4 check. The king has to move. You just have a really crushing position because of the way your pieces are placed. There's just pressure everywhere here. For example, a 6 or any other move that doesn't deal with this will run straight into pawn takes, e5, taking advantage of the pin. And for another trap here, instead of playing e5, what if you just simply go knight b to d7, then they go queen to d2, you strike with e5, they go d5, you can play a 5, and after they go bishop to h6. Beautiful idea, knight takes e4. You're seeing a common theme of this. Knight takes e4 over and over again, but ultimately after knight takes back queen to h4 is winning the material. You've won an extra pawn. But again, the important thing is not necessarily that extra pawn, it's just your dominating position.